The galaxy was vast, filled with ancient civilizations that had mastered the stars. The Andromeda Coalition, the Synthar Empire, the Tijak Dominion. All powerful, all ancient. To them, humanity was nothing more than a curiosity. Earth was just another backwater planet, its people scrambling to catch up with the rest of the universe. The human race had only recently made its first tentative steps into space, and those few who had dared venture beyond their solar system had quickly learned the harsh truth. To the established galactic powers, humans were little more than amusing distractions. On this particular day, humanity found itself at the Galactic Convergence, a once-in-a-decade summit where the galaxy's elite met to discuss the state of the universe. The Grand Hall was filled with representatives of hundreds of species, all seated in ornate, floating pods that hovered over the ground in perfect harmony. At the far end of the room, a vast holoscreen displayed the title of the summit, The Future of Galactic Unity. Humanity's representative, Ambassador James Crawford, stood at the podium, his face set in a professional mask. Around him, alien leaders whispered amongst themselves, their voices a mix of disdain and amusement. Crawford had been briefed thoroughly on the proceedings, and despite his best efforts, he couldn't ignore the tension in the air. No one here took humanity seriously. To the established species, the humans were no more than a fledgling species with no real place in the greater galaxy. As Crawford began to speak, the murmurs grew louder. The alien leaders were already bored, anticipating a speech filled with idealistic, naive notions, and that was exactly what they got. Crawford talked of humanity's potential, their ingenuity, their desire to join the galactic community, and their dream of unity and peace. But the reactions were predictable. The representatives from the Andromeda Coalition exchanged knowing glances, while the Synthar delegation barely hid their laughter. "How quaint," one of the Tijak leaders muttered under his breath, his voice carrying across the chamber. A species that can barely leave their home system is talking about galactic unity. The snide comments flew freely from every corner of the room. It wasn't just that humanity was new. It was that they were inexperienced and unsophisticated. They lacked the centuries of cultural development and advanced technologies that the galaxy's oldest civilizations had perfected. There was a common assumption that humans, no matter how hard they tried, would always be second-rate players in the cosmic game. Crawford knew this. He had been told, again and again, that the humans weren't going to be taken seriously until they showed their worth. But the ambassador was determined to change that. He paused for a moment, letting the whispers grow louder before speaking again. "Perhaps you all see us as a joke," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Maybe we don't have your technology or your centuries of history, but we have something you don't, something none of you ever had when you were young. The ability to adapt, to survive, and to innovate when it matters the most." The room fell silent for a brief moment, and for the first time that day, Crawford saw a flicker of uncertainty in the eyes of the alien leaders. "You may think of us as nothing more than an experiment in evolution," he continued, "but what you fail to understand is that humanity has always been underestimated. And that is a mistake none of you will make twice." As he finished speaking, the echoes of his words hung in the air like a challenge. The laughter and ridicule didn't stop immediately, but the seeds had been planted. Humanity wasn't done yet, and sooner than anyone expected, the galaxy would learn just how wrong they were about Earth's inhabitants. The Synthar were a force to be reckoned with, a militaristic race known for their ruthless tactics and brutal conquests. They had expanded their empire across countless star systems. Their ships were massive, their weaponry advanced beyond anything humanity had seen. And yet, they underestimated the humans. The attack came without warning. A remote human colony, nestled on the outer rim of the galaxy, became the Synthar's latest target. The colony, named New Haven, was small, populated by civilians and a handful of defense forces who were still learning how to handle space combat. The Synthar had seen it as an easy conquest, a brief strike to remind the galaxy of their might. They sent a fleet of warships, each bristling with energy cannons and devastating firepower, expecting to wipe out the colony in a matter of hours. What they didn't count on was the human resolve. Colonel Samantha Hayes, the head of New Haven's Defense Forces, had been preparing for a moment like this for years. Though the colony was small, its strategic location on the edge of the galaxy made it an ideal target for pirates and marauding forces. Hayes had always believed that humans, though inexperienced in the ways of galactic warfare, could hold their own if they were forced to fight. What she lacked in firepower, she made up for in ingenuity. As the first Xanthar ships entered the system, the New Haven forces scrambled to defend their home. At first, the battle seemed hopeless. The human fleet, made up of outdated ships with minimal shielding and weaponry, was no match for the Xanthar's advanced armada. However, Hayes knew that the Xanthar had one fatal flaw. They relied too heavily on brute force and predictable tactics. Humans, on the other hand, were capable of thinking outside the box. Hayes ordered her fleet to scatter and engage the Xanthar in hit-and-run tactics. At first, the Xanthar were puzzled. The human ships were small, maneuverable, and armed with nothing more than laser cannons and improvised explosives. They launched surprise attacks on the larger Xanthar vessels, striking weak points in their armor and retreating before the enemy could retaliate. The Xanthar fleet struggled to keep up with the unpredictable movements of the humans, who used their knowledge of the local terrain, asteroid fields, ion storms, and gravitational anomalies, to their advantage. Then, in a bold move, Hayes had the human fleet stage a feint. Using a decoy signal, they tricked the Xanthar into thinking that the human ships were retreating. The Xanthar, overconfident in their victory, chased the decoy into a nearby nebula. It was a trap. As the Xanthar entered the cloud of gas and dust, the human fleet launched a coordinated strike, using the nebula's electromagnetic interference to mask their movements. With carefully placed strikes to the Xanthar flagship's power core, they crippled the enemy's command ship and sent the entire fleet into disarray. It wasn't a perfect victory. Many human lives were lost, and the battle had left the colony heavily damaged. But when the Xanthar were forced to retreat in the face of unexpected losses, the humans realized something monumental. They had done it. They had beaten one of the galaxy's most feared empires with nothing more than clever tactics, courage, and an unrelenting will to survive. The news of the victory spread like wildfire. It was a blow to the Xanthar's reputation. A species that had long believed themselves invincible was now forced to lick their wounds in shame. And for humanity, it was a turning point. No longer would they be seen as insignificant. The galaxy had been watching, and now they were paying attention. The small victory over the Xanthar was the spark that ignited humanity's rise. But no one, not even the humans themselves, could have predicted just how quickly their fortunes would change. The first battle had been won, and the stage was set for humanity's next move, one that would shake the galaxy to its core. The victory at New Haven sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The Xanthar, once seen as an unbeatable force, had been humiliated by a ragtag fleet of humans. While many of the galaxy's species had dismissed humanity as primitive, this victory left them questioning everything they thought they knew about the newcomers. Was there more to humanity than the galaxy's elites had realized? The question lingered in the air like a storm cloud, ready to burst. For some, the victory was a mere fluke. The Xanthar, after all, had underestimated humanity, and that was their mistake. Surely, the galaxy's more powerful empires wouldn't make the same error. But as the months passed, it became clear that humanity wasn't content with just one small victory. They began to make waves in ways no one expected. Earth's leaders, emboldened by their success, began sending envoys and trade delegations to distant systems, offering technology, resources, and alliances to those who would listen. To the surprise of many, these delegations were met with cautious interest rather than outright rejection. But it wasn't just diplomacy where humans were making their mark. Their unexpected military successes began to pile up. In the Outer Rim, another human outpost was attacked, this time by a pirate syndicate known for raiding unprotected worlds. The pirates had long been a nuisance for the galaxy's more established powers, but they had never faced resistance like this before. A small human fleet, once again outgunned and outclassed, fought back with ruthless precision. The pirates were beaten back, their flagship destroyed in a daring ambush. The human victory was swift, almost surgical. It wasn't long before whispers of their strategic brilliance reached every corner of the galaxy. Meanwhile, in the halls of the Galactic Convergence, the once laughing alien leaders had started to change their tune. Some, like the Andromeda Coalition, saw potential in humanity's resourcefulness and began to reach out with trade agreements. Others, like the HFY Dominion, grew wary. They had seen the humans' defiance at the summit and now feared that they might be a threat to their long-standing dominance. At the same time, the galaxy's smaller species, many of whom had long been oppressed by the larger powers, began to take notice. They, too, had suffered under the iron fists of the powerful empires. But humans didn't follow the rules. They didn't play by the same strategies. They fought back, and in doing so, they won. The message was clear. If humanity could stand up to the Xinthar, they could stand up to anyone. Among the human leaders, there was a growing sense of optimism. Some began to see the galaxy not as a dangerous, unwelcoming expanse, but as a field ripe for conquest. The military victories were exciting, but there was a new undercurrent of ambition among the political elite. They realized that humanity's unique blend of adaptability, ingenuity, and sheer willpower could allow them to carve out their own place in the galaxy's pecking order. But not everyone was on board with this aggressive new direction. There were those who warned that humanity's rise could come at a cost. Ambassador Crawford, still deeply involved in intergalactic diplomacy, struggled to keep the balance between hope and caution. "We cannot let this victory blind us," he said in one of his more candid moments with Earth's leaders. "The galaxy will respond, and not everyone will be as forgiving as the Xinthar." The first seeds of internal division were planted. While many advocated for more aggressive expansion, others argued that humanity's strength lay in its alliances and diplomatic efforts. The question was no longer whether humanity could survive in the galaxy, but what kind of future it wanted to build. Would they continue to fight, or would they take a more calculated approach to winning allies and gaining power? As whispers of change spread throughout the galaxy, one thing became clear. Humanity was no longer the joke of the universe. They were a force, a new kind of player, with the potential to reshape everything. And while the galaxy's old powers tried to figure out how to deal with them, humanity was already moving forward, ruthlessly, quickly, and with the kind of determination that had once been their greatest asset. The galaxy had never been so tense. Humanity, once dismissed as an insignificant species, was now a rising power that even the most dominant empires could no longer ignore. The New Haven victory had set off a chain of events that rippled across the galaxy, drawing attention from even the most established civilizations. Humanity had proven it could win. Against the odds, against the biggest threats the galaxy had to offer. And the elites of the galaxy were beginning to take notice. The scene was set for another major event at the Galactic Convergence. This time, humanity would play a more central role in the discussions. The stakes were high. The galaxy's balance of power was shifting, and every faction in the room was anxious to secure their position. Humanity, once seen as the galaxy's underdog, was now a force to be reckoned with, and that made their presence both a blessing and a curse. Ambassador James Crawford, who had earned a certain degree of respect following New Haven, stood once again at the podium. This time, he wasn't just presenting humanity as a hopeful ally. He was negotiating the future of his people. The world had changed in a matter of months, and so had the human race. The small victories were piling up, and humanity was no longer on the back foot. The room fell silent as Crawford introduced humanity's latest proposal, an offer of technological advancements and weapons, resources that could alter the course of galactic politics. The offer was a calculated gamble. If the galaxy's powers accepted, humanity would secure a foothold in the galaxy's power structure. If they rejected it, Crawford knew that war could be inevitable. The major powers listened carefully, their expressions unreadable. The Andromeda Coalition, a well-established diplomatic force, was first to speak. "We have seen your resilience, humanity," their leader said, his voice calm but with an edge of suspicion. "But what you offer us, weapons, technology, what are we to make of this? Are you seeking power or simply survival?" Crawford kept his composure. "Both," he replied. "We seek to survive. But we also seek a place at the table. We offer technology that could benefit all of us. In exchange, we ask for your cooperation and a seat among the stars, not as an equal but as an ally." There was a long pause. The tension in the room was palpable. The Xanthar, who had been publicly humiliated by humanity's unexpected victory, were glaring at Crawford with seething resentment. Their leader, a towering creature with pale blue skin and a collection of scars that marked countless wars, leaned forward. "You misunderstand, human," the Xanthar leader said, his voice cold as ice. "The galaxy does not need your weapons. We need nothing from you. You've had your small victories, but that is all they are, small. Do not presume to negotiate with us." Crawford felt the pressure mounting. His heart raced, but he didn't let it show. This moment could define humanity's future. He had to get it right. "You're right," he said, his voice steady. "We have had small victories, but we've learned something from each one. We're not a threat to you, yet. But if you continue to underestimate us, if you continue to reject our offer, the outcome won't be the same as New Haven. The next time we face off, we will be ready." The Xanthar leader's expression didn't change, but the room was still. Crawford had thrown down a challenge, but it wasn't one that could be ignored. The Andromeda Coalition delegates whispered among themselves, exchanging wary glances. The Tijak Dominion, usually so confident, seemed uncertain for the first time in decades. Crawford had put the galaxy's powers on notice. Humanity was no longer a joke. They were a player. The offer, however dangerous, carried weight, and that made it dangerous indeed. The other factions debated privately, each calculating their next moves. Could they afford to reject humanity's offer outright, or was it better to engage, to form an alliance and secure their own survival in this rapidly changing galaxy? The conversation swirled around the room like a storm, and Crawford knew one thing for certain: humanity's place in the galaxy would never be the same. But what kind of future would they create for themselves? The choices made here, today, would shape humanity's destiny. And as the summit continued, one thing became abundantly clear. Humanity was no longer asking for permission. They were demanding respect. Humanity's gamble at the galactic convergence had paid off, but it came with unforeseen consequences. While many smaller species were eager to engage with humanity, the Tijak Dominion, the most powerful and feared empire in the galaxy, responded in the only way they knew how, by declaring war. The Tijak had been watching humanity's rise with growing concern. The victory at New Haven had been a blow to their pride, and the human offer of advanced technology and weapons had been seen as a challenge to their dominance. The Tijak had ruled the galaxy for centuries, and no species, no matter how resourceful or innovative, would be allowed to disrupt that balance. If humanity sought to challenge the Tijak, they would be crushed. The announcement came swiftly. In a broadcast that echoed through the galaxy, the Tijak Emperor declared that humanity's recent actions were seen as a direct threat to the stability of the galaxy. The Emperor's voice was filled with cold authority, each word deliberate and filled with menace. "We, the Tijak Dominion, do not tolerate threats. Your race has overstepped its bounds, human. You have been warned. But now you have chosen war." It was a declaration that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. Species that had once quietly watched humanity's rise now found themselves caught in the wake of this galactic conflict. The Tijak were known for their vast fleets, advanced weapons, and brutal tactics. They had the strength to crush entire worlds beneath their boothiel without blinking. For humanity, it was a moment of reckoning. The Tijak had far more resources and military might than humanity could ever hope to match. Their fleets were enormous, their war machines seemingly invincible. But humanity, for all its inexperience, had one advantage the Tijak underestimated. They were unpredictable. Colonel Samantha Hayes, who had earned a reputation for her resourcefulness during the New Haven campaign, was appointed to lead humanity's defense. The odds were against them, vastly so, but Hayes had already proven that humans could survive against overwhelming odds. Her strategy would not rely on brute force. It would rely on something far more dangerous, the ability to think in ways that no other species would. Hayes began immediately working with Earth's fledgling fleet, refining tactics that would utilize every advantage. The humans had smaller, faster ships that could strike quickly and retreat before the enemy could respond, the element of surprise, and the ability to turn every space anomaly into a weapon. She began drawing up plans for guerrilla tactics, sabotage, ambushes, and hit-and-run operations, aimed at disrupting the Tijak supply lines and forcing them to fight on humanity's terms. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the diplomatic world was in turmoil. Many species that had previously sought to align themselves with humanity now hesitated. The Tijak were the undisputed giants of the galaxy, and to stand against them was to risk everything. Still, some of the smaller oppressed species began to look to humanity as their champions, seeing in them the same resilience they had shown in their own struggles. The spark of rebellion was beginning to catch fire. Ambassador Crawford found himself at the heart of the storm, trying to balance diplomacy with humanity's growing military power. He knew that Earth's future depended not just on their ability to fight, but on their ability to forge alliances. The Tijak were not a threat humanity could defeat alone. Yet even as Crawford pushed for peace talks, he knew that the Tijak would never negotiate. They had made their intentions clear. As humanity prepared for war, the question of what kind of war it would be hung heavy in the air. Would they be able to survive against the Tijak's overwhelming might, or would their stubbornness lead them into an unwinnable conflict? The galaxy watched in silence, waiting to see how humanity would respond to the ultimate challenge. The Tijak had thrown the first punch, but humanity wasn't ready to go down without a fight. The stakes had never been higher. The war with the Tijak Dominion began not with grand fleets clashing in the void, but with an explosion of tension that set the entire galaxy on edge. Humanity's first move wasn't to charge headfirst into battle. Instead, it was a calculated risk, targeting a Tijak supply world on the fringes of their empire, Valthos Prime. Valthos Prime was a critical hub for the Tijak military, a planet rich with resources needed to fuel their war machine. It was a place where raw materials were processed and sent to Tijak warships stationed at the galaxy's front lines. Taking it would be a blow to the Tijak war effort, a message that humanity wasn't just playing defense. They could strike back too. Colonel Samantha Hayes, now leading humanity's combined forces in what was called Operation Hammerfall, had carefully chosen Valthos Prime for its strategic value. The Tijak would never expect an attack on such a well-guarded, heavily fortified world. The Tijak thought themselves invulnerable there, nestled deep in their own space, and that, Hayes knew, was exactly what would give humanity the element of surprise. The human fleet, still a patchwork of repurposed ships and improvised designs, was a far cry from the might of the Tijak. But it had something the Tijak lacked: the ability to move fast, strike hard, and then disappear. The human fleet, divided into smaller, agile strike groups, approached Valthos Prime under the cover of a dense asteroid field, using the debris to shield their ships from the Tijak's long-range sensors. The attack was swift. The first wave of human ships descended on the planet's surface, targeting vital infrastructure, communication relays, power grids, and factories. The Tijak, caught off guard, scrambled to respond. Their massive warships, built for sustained engagements rather than quick responses, had trouble adjusting to the humans' rapid hit-and-run tactics. It was clear. Humanity was playing a different game than the Tijak. Hayes knew that the Tijak would send reinforcements, and soon. The trick would be to cause as much damage as possible before the full weight of their fleet arrived. And that's exactly what the humans did. They crippled the planet's defenses, leaving Valthos Prime vulnerable to a final devastating strike. Then, in the final moments of the battle, a surprise came. A fleet of unknown ships arrived in orbit above Valthos Prime. They were not human, but their designs were unmistakably of a similar nature, sleek, fast, and deadly. The new fleet was made up of ships from a variety of smaller species that had been allies of humanity or had been inspired by their victories. The rumors of rebellion against the Tijak were true. The human message had spread. With the new reinforcements in place, the battle reached its apex. The Tijak fleet, now fully engaged, found themselves under attack from two directions at once. The humans struck with precision, targeting the Tijak warship's vulnerable spots, while their newfound allies harried the Tijak from the rear. The Tijak, unaccustomed to being attacked on multiple fronts, faltered. The battle was hard-fought. The human forces took heavy losses, but the message was clear. Humanity, now with the backing of its allies, had forced the Tijak to retreat. Valthos Prime, though heavily damaged, was in human hands. The Tijak would not get away unscathed, and humanity had proven that it could not only survive but strike decisively when needed. In the aftermath of the battle, the galaxy was left reeling. The Tijak Dominion had suffered a major defeat. The tide was turning, but the war was far from over. Humanity had shown the galaxy that they were no longer underdogs. They had played the Tijak's game, and they had won. The victory at Valthos Prime became a symbol. The galaxy, which had once watched humans with disdain, now began to see them as something different, dangerous, unpredictable, and willing to fight for their place in the stars. The Tijak had been humiliated, and more importantly, humanity had shown that they could unite with others, forging alliances where none existed before. But the Tijak would not forgive this blow easily. The war was just beginning, and the stakes had never been higher. The victory at Valthos Prime had sent shockwaves throughout the galaxy, but the Tijak Dominion was not one to bow down easily. The defeat stung their pride, and they would stop at nothing to reclaim their lost glory. The Tijak Emperor, enraged and humiliated, called for a swift and brutal counterattack, one that would demonstrate their unyielding dominance and crush humanity's growing alliances once and for all. The Tijak response was swift and merciless. In a matter of weeks, the once feared Tijak fleet, now reinforced and bolstered by fresh recruits, gathered in massive numbers at the edge of their territory. Their flagship, Ursakhar, a behemoth of war capable of wiping out entire fleets in a single strike, led the charge. This wasn't just a retaliation. It was meant to be a warning to the galaxy. Humanity's victory was an anomaly, a fluke. The Tijak would reassert their power, and they would do so with devastating force. The first target was humanity's newly forged alliance, a coalition of smaller, oppressed species that had rallied behind the human cause. The Tijak struck first at the planet of Torath, a key world in the new alliance. Its inhabitants comprised of the Ildrians, a peaceful, technologically advanced species that had long been under the thumb of the Tijak. The attack came without warning. Tijak warships tore through the atmosphere, raining fire down upon the cities below. Their ruthless efficiency left the Ildrians little chance to defend themselves. The news spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The Tijak had struck again, and this time they were making it clear that no species, no matter how united, would stand against them. The message was unmistakable. The galaxy had been warned, and the Tijak would tolerate no further defiance. Back on Earth, Colonel Samantha Hayes and Ambassador James Crawford were faced with a grim reality. The battle at Valthos Prime had been a victory, but the Tijak were regrouping with vengeance. Humanity had gained allies, but these were fragile, newly formed coalitions that had yet to face the true power of the Tijak war machine. Humanity's resources were limited, and their fleet, though resilient, was still small compared to the vast armadas of the Tijak. Hayes met with Crawford in a darkened war room, surrounded by flickering holograms of the galaxy's sectors. The weight of their choices hung heavy between them. "We can't wait for the Tijak to come to us," Hayes said, her voice hard with resolve. "We need to strike first. We can't give them the chance to pick off our allies one by one." Crawford, ever the diplomat, knew the gravity of such a move. An all-out offensive could push us to the brink of extinction. We have to tread carefully. If we engage the Tijak head-on without support, we may lose everything. We need more allies, more resources. We can't afford to be reckless. Hayes nodded but was resolute. "Then we make more alliances. We'll find a way to even the odds, no matter what. The Tijak will only understand one thing, that we're not afraid to fight." The human fleet, though outnumbered, wasn't without its advantages. The hit-and-run tactics that had worked at Valthos Prime could be used again, this time with even more precision. But Hayes knew that taking down the Tijak would require more than just clever maneuvers. They needed a decisive blow. A war of attrition wouldn't work. Humanity had to strike at the heart of the Tijak Dominion, at their most critical assets. Meanwhile, in the farthest reaches of the galaxy, the smaller factions that had witnessed humanity's rise were beginning to rally behind them. The message was spreading. The Tijak were not invincible, and humanity was proving that even the most powerful empire could be challenged. As more species threw their support behind the human cause, humanity's position in the galaxy became more precarious. The Tijak were furious, and they would stop at nothing to crush the rebellion. A decision was looming. Crawford knew that humanity needed a plan that would bring the galaxy together while forcing the Tijak to reconsider their path. But time was running out. Every day that passed saw the Tijak gathering more forces, preparing for the next devastating strike. In the distance, the stars shimmered ominously. The galaxy was heading toward the edge of a precipice, and there was no telling whether humanity would be the one to fall, or if they would be the ones to push the Tijak off the cliff. The galaxy was on the brink of chaos. After the Tijak's brutal assault on Tarath, the stakes had never been higher. Humanity's resolve was now tested more than ever, with both their survival and the future of their alliances hanging in the balance. The Tijak were preparing for a final decisive push, an all-out offensive designed to crush humanity and its newfound allies once and for all. The next battle would determine the fate of the galaxy. Colonel Samantha Hayes knew this was no longer about holding ground. It was about taking the fight to the Tijak and ending their reign of terror before it could spread any further. Her strategy was simple, but brutal. A direct assault on the Tijak's central war fleet. If they could destroy the Ursakar, the flagship that had become a symbol of the Tijak's unmatched might, the blow would be devastating, both strategically and psychologically. The plan was risky, and Hayes knew it. The Ursakar was the heart of the Tijak war machine, heavily protected and nearly indestructible. But Hayes also understood the nature of the Tijak. They were arrogant. They believed no one could stand against them, and that belief had already cost them dearly at Valthos Prime. Humanity's strength lay in its ability to outthink, outmaneuver, and, most importantly, outlast the Tijak. With the human fleet reinforced by the smaller factions that had rallied behind them, Hayes prepared for the most dangerous operation of her career. The galaxy's fate would rest on the success or failure of this mission. The Tijak would expect the humans to strike in the same unpredictable ways they had before, but Hayes had something else in mind. The plan was not just an attack, it was a feint. The bulk of humanity's forces would engage in a diversionary battle on the outskirts of Tijak-controlled space. The goal was to draw the Tijak fleet's attention and force them to deploy their forces in defense, leaving the Ursakar vulnerable. At the same time, a smaller, more elite strike team, composed of the fastest human ships and their allied vessels, would slip past the Tijak defenses, heading straight for the heart of the Tijak fleet. The moment of truth arrived as the fleets assembled. The tension in the war room was unbearable. Ambassador Crawford stood beside Hayes, watching as the holographic displays flickered and shifted. "You're sure about this?" he asked, though he knew the answer. Humanity's best chance lay in taking the Tijak by surprise, disrupting their entire command structure. "There's no other choice," Hayes replied, her voice cold with determination. "If we don't strike now, we lose everything. The Tijak are not just an empire. They're a cancer. If we don't remove them now, they'll spread. This is the last chance." As the fleets engaged in their decoy battle, the human strike team moved silently toward the Ursakar. Time was their enemy. The Tijak would soon realize the deception and come to their flagship's defense, but it would be too late. The human fleet, although small in comparison, had one advantage. They knew how to move quickly, how to fight with the kind of ruthless efficiency that the Tijak had underestimated from the very beginning. Hayes' elite team slipped past the final Tijak defenses and arrived at the Ursakar. What they encountered was worse than they had expected. Czech reinforcements had already arrived in force, and the flagship was heavily shielded. The plan was beginning to falter, but Hayes refused to back down. She ordered the attack to continue, and for the next several hours, the battle raged in the shadow of the Ursakar. Humans, allied species, and Tijak clashed in a brutal melee, with each side fighting for supremacy. In the chaos, a breakthrough came. A small team of human saboteurs, led by Lieutenant Margot Sykes, managed to infiltrate the flagship's interior. Working their way through the darkened, labyrinthine corridors of the ship, they planted explosives in key sections of the Ursakar, targeting its core reactors. The clock was ticking, and they had minutes to escape before the bombs detonated. At the last moment, Hayes' fleet arrived to provide cover, launching a desperate final assault on the Tijak forces that were closing in on the saboteurs. In those heart-stopping minutes, the battle was won not by brute force, but by human ingenuity, daring, and sheer will. With a final, resounding explosion, the Ursakar was destroyed, tearing through the heart of the Tijak fleet. The shockwave reverberated across the battlefield, and for the first time in a long while, the Tijak fleet hesitated. In that moment of uncertainty, the tide turned. The Tijak, once so sure of their invincibility, were thrown into disarray. Their command structure had been shattered, and they were left scrambling to regain control. The humans, along with their allies, pressed the advantage. In the hours that followed, the Tijak forces, now leaderless and disorganized, began to fall back. The battle was not won with a single blow, but with a series of calculated risks, audacious moves, and the unrelenting determination of those who refused to give up. The victory at the Ursakar marked the beginning of the end for the Tijak Dominion. It wasn't just a military victory. It was a statement to the entire galaxy. Humanity was here to stay. The galaxy had underestimated humanity for too long, and now the tide had turned in their favor. The war wasn't over, but humanity had won the first major battle in what would soon be a galactic revolution.